Jai Shankar, everyone. We'll start with the Sabha Prarambha Prarthana. Dakshinasya Samarambha Shankaracharya Madhyama Asmadacharya Paryanta Smarya Guru Parampara Shruti Smruti Purananam Alayam Karunalayam Namami Bhagavad Padam Shankaram Loka Shankaram Shankaram Shankaracharyam Keshavam Badarayanam Sutra Bhashya Kritau.
In the government administration. So we are really blessed with having Shobhan Pachi today. And I'm quite sure today's interaction with another young professional writer, Preeti Ubhaigar Pachi. I don't know whether I should call you Pachi, Preeti. No. So I'm quite sure the interaction will be very interesting. And I'm very happy to have both of you on this KSA Mulaqat platform. Thank you and all the best. And I'm quite sure we'll all enjoy over the next, couple of hours. Thank you.
So I'll come in now very briefly. I am aware that most of you all have already probably heard about CSN, and the last Mulaqat was barely a month back. So I'll keep it brief. I'm sure there'll be others who have not heard this also. CSN Mari Chitrapur Saraswat network, and like Praveen Ma'am already explained. One thing I want to clarify, the Mulaqat I had suggested in KSA committee, but I don't think the idea was mine. In fact, I no longer remember who suggested it, because we have a lot of enthusiasts for CSN and we have a very vibrant task force. So it was first discussed in the task force, and then I suggested it in the committee, and Praveen Ma'am was very kind to actively encourage it. So the object of job or academics or whatever it is, we are very lucky to have a very strong group parampara. Songela religious spiritual needs are met completely by the mutt. And bakiche artistic master platforms asati. KSA has been doing wonderful work. So there was a need for a platform where we could exchange ideas about our work, and that is where CSN comes in. And the Mulaqat was the first thing that we started off with, so that we can all learn from the inspiring lives of, high-achieving Amchis. This is now, I think, the 7th Mulaqat, and we hope to have many more. There are so many Amchis who are doing exceedingly well. Other than that, we are also holding workshops where domain experts come and share their knowledge and their expertise areas. This is also regularly being held, maybe once a month or so. And third, we have a database of all Amchi businesses on our website, which is www.canarasaraswat.com/CSN. This already has around 170 names of Amchis who run all kinds of astonishing array of businesses. So what I would request everyone is to check out this website and just see the kind of businesses Amchis are already in, because it will help dispel the myth that Amchis are not cut out for business. Amchis are very much cut out for business. It all needs a little support, a little initiative, a little hand-holding, and we can all do it. Other than that, we also have live interaction platforms. We have formed WhatsApp groups and Telegram groups for entrepreneurs, for people in business. I don't think I want to go into too many details right now, but I just want to say this. For a movement of this sort, a talented artist, let's say a musician, a classical musician, he or she can hold the audience. They can create magic for 2 hours all by themselves. But that doesn't work with a movement like CSN. For CSN to create magic, there has to be mass involvement, mass participation, and only then the magic starts happening. So that's where I have a request of each and every one of you all who is present today. I would request each one of you all to identify at least 3 entrepreneurs, Amchi entrepreneurs each, and urge them to list themselves on our database on our website, and I repeat the website address again. It is www.canarasaraswat.com/CSN. And having numbers, and also, like I mentioned earlier, all those volunteers who silently keep working behind the scenes as part of our task force. These events need a lot of back-end support, and they're all there all the time. I am fortunate to be the visible face for the time being for this moment. But going forward, it could be somebody else. It has to be somebody else. And like I said, this can work only if there's mass participation. We have a lot of people with us right now, and we want all of you all to be part of this. Thank you. I now request my friend Kiran Munkurmam to take over the proceedings, introduce CHF, and then the rest of it. Thank you.
Thank you, Rajiv. Good morning, good evening, and good afternoon, everyone across the globe. This is the second in our series of Mulaqat across the oceans. And Rajiv and myself, under the guidance from Praveen Mam and in KSA, and Arun Heble, who is the president of Chitrapur Heritage Foundation in the United States, we got together and started this. And we have an exciting program today. So firstly, a little bit about the Chitrapur Heritage Foundation in the United States. And I'm one of its founding members, together with our president, Arun Heble. Arun Heble, Mom, very philanthropic and has dedicated a good part of his life in support of our Sri Chitrapur Mutt. So under the blessings of our Swamiji, we had started this organization, CHF, and it's a not-for-profit organization in the United States. It was established in 2006 to engage the US laity with our Mutt and our Guru Parampara, and further to support its causes, both religious as well as social. And the CHF objective is also to uplift the underprivileged through financial aid, education, and several other means in the rural vicinities of our mutts in India and the local communities in the United States. So in fiscal 2020, Chitrapur Heritage Foundation collected approximately $500,000 US. So that would be $5 lakh, as you would say it in India, for the purposes of Vantiga, school projects, and community support. This is entirely through the blessings of our beloved Swamiji, and we received very good guidance from Praveen Mam and his team, together with Arun Heble Mam, our president. So we are deeply engaged, and we are so happy as we work together. We've been doing this since 2006. We have supported causes such as Samvit Sudha, the Srivalli High School, the Kotekar School, Karla Parijnan Vidyalay, Parijnan Ashram Education and Vocational Center for the Handicapped, or just known as the Virar School, and the acquisition of the Tirumala site, the Bhatkal. There was also more recently the COVID project that was carried out. So what are these projects are that are spawned from the Sri Chitrapur Mutt under guidance of our Swamiji and leadership of Praveen Mam. We do our best to support them for these very noble causes that they've given their life towards. I'm grateful for the sustained efforts put by all of our volunteers as well as our donors in the United States for these causes to keep this momentum going. And we are all in CHF extremely grateful to our beloved leader and our Swamiji, Param Puja Sadhuja Shankarashram Swamiji. Having discussed about CHF, I will now talk briefly about our interviewer, and she will introduce you then to our chief guest and host speaker for this event. So firstly, our young adult, Preeti Ubaikar, was born and raised in London. And then as a teenager, she moved to the United States. She attended the University of Texas, where she received 2 undergraduate degrees, one in radio, TV, film, associated with communication, and the other in advertising. She later obtained a master's degree in digital media from the University of Washington. And for as long as she can remember, Preeti has had a passion for writing that has taken her around the world, including 2 years in Mumbai, and led her to create content across a variety of formats, from TV scripts to web copy. She has worked for advertising agencies such as the J.W. Walter, Thompson, and Contently, magazines such as Time Out India and Offshore Magazine. On the corporate side, she has developed content for companies such as Dell Technologies, and as you know, very famously in India, the CNBC TV 18. Preeti currently lives in Houston. Her hobbies include watching soccer, so football as it is known in India, and in fact everywhere in the world other than the United States. Going to the movie theater to watch movies, reading, and at this tender age, she is volunteering as a tutor for English as a second language in Houston, where a lot of underprivileged children are given help understanding English after school hours. With her charismatic British accent, she is excited as ever to interview our honored guest, fiction writer Shobhan Bantwal, for today's event. With that, welcome, Preeti. I'll hand it to you. Thank you.
Thank you, Kiran Ma'am. We're very excited today to have Shobhan Bachchi with us. As a brief introduction, we're going to get into specifics with Shobhan Bachchi, but as a brief introduction, Shobhan Bantwal began her successful writing career in 2002 at the age of 50. Her books include The Dowry Bride, The Forbidden Daughter, The Sari Shop Widow, The Unexpected Son, The Full Moon Bride, and The Reluctant Matchmaker, all published by Kensington Books. Her books have also been published in India by Fingerprint Publishing. She writes stories about contemporary Indian women and romance and has described her style as Bollywood in a book. Shobhan Bachchi's plots feature women's issues like arranged marriage and cross-cultural stories from the Indian diaspora. Her short stories have been published in The Romantic Times, India Abroad, Little India, India Currents, and New Women. In 2008, she won the Golden Leaf Award for the Best Debut Book. I'll turn it over now quickly to Shobhan Bachchi.
Thank you, Preeti, for that very kind introduction. Namaste, everybody. It's a pleasure to be in front of you today. I know that this group has invited a lot of luminaries in the business field, sports field, scientific field, and so I'm really honored and humbled to be the only fiction writer who has been invited to speak today. I would like to start by thanking all the organizers from Canara Saraswat Association, Praveen Kadle, Kishore Masurkar, Jairam Khambatkon, and Rajiv Kalyanpur, and also the Entor technical support team. Without them, this would not be possible. I know that. So I'm happy to hear that. And in the USA, it's the Chitrapur Heritage Foundation Group. Arun Heble, the president, and Secretary Pramod Mavinkurve. And Arun and Pramod, thank you so much for suggesting my name as a potential guest. Again, it wouldn't have happened if you had not suggested my name. And the two organizers that I have been working closely with for the past few weeks, Kiran Munkur and Preeti Ubaikar. Kiran, you have been the epitome of patience with me. I have been asking too many questions and bugging you at all kinds of times of the day. And you have done a wonderful job of, coordinating everything with Preeti and me. You have always been available. And same thing with Preeti. You have been very patient with me too. And I know you have put together a wonderful questionnaire so I can answer all the questions you have. And now I look forward to answering any questions that Preeti has. Thank you, everybody, once again for joining us.
Perfect. Thanks, Shobhan Pachi. So to start off with, I'd love to get some background on kind of your childhood and your upbringing, your life before you moved to the US.
Well, my childhood was a typical, Amchi girl's childhood back in the 50s and 60s. I was born and raised in Belgaum, a small town in Karnataka. Home life was typical Amchi. We had the usual maslak, randup, and all of those things. And the only difference was that my mother managed my father's medical office. My father, Vasant Kopikar, was an ophthalmologist and a very well-known one, because we were in a small town and pretty much anybody who had an eye problem came to my father. So we knew everybody in town, they knew us. And for a while, for a few years, my father had hired help to run the office, but he just couldn't find anybody reliable. So my mother decided that when her youngest child, my younger sister, was about 4 or 5 years old, that she would manage the office herself. I am number 4 of 5 sisters. And I think, Kiran has put together a PowerPoint presentation, and he has various slides that kind of go with all my answers. So, I was kind of mothered by not just my mother, but my older sisters. And there's a picture of me as an infant in 1951. There's a picture of me with my mother, Uma Kopikar. And then as a toddler, I'm sitting in my oldest sister's lap, Geeta. She is now Geeta Rao. And my other 2 sisters, unfortunately, the sister in the middle who is sitting right next to me with the round face, she has passed away now. She passed away in 2006. So she's no longer there, but my 3 other sisters are there. My baby sister, Shanta Kagal, who lives in Belgaum, is not in the picture because she was not born at the time. I don't know whether it's because my father's camera broke down or whether my parents got so busy that they didn't take any pictures. There are no pictures of me and my sisters in school uniforms or something like that. But my mother was, an amazing woman. She would do all the cooking and she was very religious. She would do her morning puja with the light lamps on, and she would read the scriptures and have aarti and everything, and then go to my father's clinic and run the whole place like an office manager. So that was my childhood. My sisters were very good little Konkani girls, and I was the hellion in the family. And I'm convinced that I single-handedly gave my parents all the gray hairs they have. It was just something that made me very rebellious. We went to a convent school, which was run by nuns. It was the only English medium school in town, so that was the only place we could go to learn English language. So, my sisters were good little girls. They did their homework and they stayed within the parameters, but I was always the rebellious sort. And I was the bane of the nuns, I think. The nuns used to punish me. They believed in corporal punishment. So I got struck on my knuckles quite a few times. So, that was life. But if I tell people what I did as a hellion, in today's society, it doesn't sound like a rebellion. It sounds like a normal child. But back in those days, in the 50s and 60s, in a rural town, you couldn't get away with a lot of things. There used to be notes that the nuns wrote to my parents about how bad I was. Mathematics was my weak subject. So if I got the answers wrong, I got yelled at also. So mathematics has always been the bane of my life. But once school was over, things got a lot better. Things got a whole lot better.
Great.
And when I went to college, it was like getting out of prison. I really enjoyed, college because there was so much more freedom. I could choose my subjects. I could get away from mathematics. And it was a place where I could indulge in, my passion for debating, for elocution, for drama. And I did extremely well in my studies too. Academically, I excelled, which I didn't do in school. In school, I was an average student, but I was an excellent, outstanding student in college, mainly because, I was given the freedom to learn at my own pace and do my own things. And for the first time in my life, I was competing with boys. In the convent school, it was all girls. And competing with boys just sort of gave me that energy and that inspiration to do better and better and prove that I could do better than the boys in my class. And I also won the Best Female Student Award in 1969. And I think on the screen, Kiran has put up some pictures from those days with my awards, etc. And after that, I went for my master's degree because to Dharwad, because we didn't have anything beyond a bachelor's degree in our small rural town. And there also I did extremely well. I stood first in the university in the sociology curriculum that I had chosen. And after that, about a year after I graduated with my master's degree, I got married. So that's about what my childhood is.
Great. Well, you mentioned that you weren't very good in maths, but definitely English and languages and reading and writing was your strong suit. So what led you to have an interest in reading and writing? Where did that come from?
I think it came from my mother. My mother was only 14 when she got married, but she loved reading. She was a good writer. I mean, she didn't do any formal writing as such, but when she wrote letters, they were beautiful letters that she wrote to her family, the in-laws, and to us after we migrated. And she instilled the love of books in all of her children. We always read. And one of my fondest memories is a library in our town called Oliver's Library. And Oliver's was this tiny little room filled with books. And you had to become a member at 5 rupees a month or something like that. And all of us were members, every one of the kids in our house and my mother. And we used to look forward to going there and borrowing books from there. And it was something that we depended on so much that twice a year, Oliver would go to Mumbai now, to buy fresh books. And he would sell off all the old books to make room for the new books. And when he went off, he would be gone for about a week. And we couldn't wait for Oliver to come back and open the library again, because there would be a new supply of books. And it's not just me, my friends, my sisters, we would all be eagerly waiting for Oliver to come back. And that's one of my favorite childhood memories, when my mother used to take all of us to the library. So books have always been a big part of our lives. Despite the fact that my mother was raised in Bangalore in a typical Konkani family, she got an excellent education because she was fortunate to be the daughter of the Chief Justice of the Mysore High Court. And so she went to school with the British kids back in the 20s and 30s. So she was lucky to have a great British style education. So her English skills were great, and she was very fluent in Marathi, Kannada, Hindi, and she also knew some Tamil, having grown up in Bangalore. So she was a linguist as well. So she was a great inspiration to us, and that's how we all started to love reading and books and writing.
That's great. That's great. And then a big transition in your life happened after college, which was your move to the US. So I'd love to know how that came about. That's a big story there for us to learn about.
Well, I was really not interested in getting married at that point because I had a job offer as an officer with the Union Bank. And I had taken an exam and I had passed the officer's exam, and they had offered me a job. And I had also been accepted as a PhD student at Jawaharlal Nehru University. So I was trying to weigh my options between one and the other. But in the meantime, you know how Indian parents are, especially in those days. I mean, by that time, I was about 22 years old, and my mother decided that, it's best for you to get married instead of getting a job or getting a PhD. It's more important for a girl like you to get married. And I kind of grudgingly accepted that wisdom. And Prakash, my husband now, was going to come to India to find a bride for himself. That was way back in 1973. He had been working in the US for 3 years by that time, and he was going to come down just for 3 weeks. In that 3 weeks, he was going to meet a couple of girls. He was going to make up his mind. He was going to get engaged. He was going to get married. So, all that was going to happen. So to meet him, my mother took me to Bombay, and I grudgingly went with her. And I said, all right, I'm willing to meet him, but don't count on the fact that I'm going to say yes. And at some point she convinced me. She said, good boys are very rare, whereas a college degree and a job are much, much, easy to get in life. So you can always get married, go to the United States, do what you want to do. And but please don't turn down a perfectly nice match just because you want to do something else with your life. And I said yes. And 2 days after I met Prakash, I got married to him. And there are some pictures that Kiran just put up. There's a wedding picture there in 1973. And less than 2 weeks after we were married, Prakash left for the United States. I had to wait a little bit because I had to get my visa. Back in those days, visas were quite easy to get. All you did was go apply that you're a newlywed married to this person who's working in the US, and you got a visa. So I followed him in early 1974. And that's what brought me to the United States. And I've been here since.
Wow. So what was it like transitioning your life at that age to completely new country, somewhere you'd never been and probably didn't know a whole lot about?
Well, it was a bit of a culture shock because, and also climate shock, because I came in early March, and March is a hot month in Mumbai. And I got off at JFK Airport in New York City. And back in those days, the only way you could come to the US from any other country, from India anyway, was to JFK Airport and then get a connecting flight from there to wherever. But Prakash lived in Bucks County, Pennsylvania at the time, so he could come and pick me up at the airport. I got out of the airport building, and it was like a slap in the face because it was cold winter weather and it was windy, and I'm standing there with my sari flying all over the place. And I'm hanging on to my bag while Prakash went to pick up the car from the parking lot. He said, just wait here with your bags. I'll come and pick you up. But it takes a while to get to that parking lot and get out of there. So I was standing there for about 15 minutes and I was freezing, especially my feet, because I was wearing sandals. I didn't even have shoes in India. I mean, who wears shoes with saris in India? At least not in those days. So I didn't have any shoes that covered my feet. I had sandals on, and I had a very thin coat that my mother gave me that she had from some ancient days. I don't know where she got it, but she said, here, wear this. You're going to be cold. And it was so cold. And a bit of a culture shock because I saw a couple kissing passionately, saying goodbye to each other at the airport. And that kind of, oh, wow, this happens in public, that kind of thing. So it was culture and weather. Other than that, I mean, I was fine. Once we got home and, I adjusted to life here.
And what did you miss the most from India?
I think my family, because one thing we always did, my father used to work very, very long hours. I mean, he would start, his surgery was always scheduled for about 7 a.m. They would be up. My parents would be up by about 5:30, and 7 o'clock would be his surgery time. 7 to 9, he performed surgeries. Then he saw all the rest of the patients, came home, had a late lunch, then rested a little, read the Times of India, and then went back to his clinic at about 4 o'clock. And then he would work till about 8:30 or so. But no matter how late he came home, the one meal of the day we ate together was dinner. So it was at the end of the day when we all shared what our day was like. Papa would talk about his patients and, any funny stories. He would never give away, of course, any private information about his patients. That was a no-no. But, some funny stories about what some patients said to him, what he said to them. And my mother, as the office manager, would have her own stories to tell. And then they would ask us how our day was at school, at college. And it was a family meal. So that was the thing I missed the most. Every evening I would just I was depressed In fact, so depressed that Prakash said, let's go visit your sister in Chicago, my sister, Nirmala Bangalore, the one Jairam Khambatkar mentioned. She lived in Chicago at the time. And so we hopped on a plane and went and visited her, and I felt so much better.
Oh, wow. That's great. That's great that you had family that you could see in the US. And then in terms of your life and career in the US, in the 70s and 80s, you established your family and your career here. Can you tell us a little bit about your career and how you got started in the US and the kind of jobs you took on when you first arrived here?
Yes. For the first few years, I didn't really work. I had part-time jobs here and there because, first of all, 3 months after I came here, Prakash changed jobs. So we moved from Pennsylvania to New Jersey. And then just as we were settling there, he was sent off on a project to Wyoming. And he and I decided that would be a good time for me to go with him so that we could do a lot of sightseeing while we were still young and free to roam about. So I joined him and we spent about a year in Wyoming. So I didn't work there. I mean, that was not a place most women could find work. It was a very small town and basically snowbound for about 8 months in the whole year. So, I just stayed home. And then after we came back, we moved to, he had to change jobs again because the company was going to move to California, and he had no interest in moving to the West Coast because the opportunities for his electrical engineering work was, the opportunities were rare and on the West Coast, and they were better on the East Coast. So he changed jobs again. So he worked for a company in Princeton, New Jersey. So we moved there, and then we bought a house, and then I was pregnant. And during pregnancy, we also decided that I would wait until the baby came and grew up a little bit before I could work. But in the meantime, I joined Rider University in New Jersey for a second master's degree. So when Maya was about 2 years old, and Maya is our only child. She was born in September 1977. And when she was about 2 years old, I started a program in public administration for a master's degree. It was part-time. It was in the evenings, so Prakash could watch the baby, or I could have a babysitter if he was traveling. So it worked out well. Took me about 2.5 years to get the degree. And after I got the degree, I went to work for a private company for a few years because I was basically keen on working for the government because I had a public administration degree. That, public service was what I wanted to do. But they had a hiring freeze in the New Jersey state government. So I decided to take whatever I could get. And I worked for a transport company. And then 6 years later, I had an opportunity to go work for the government. So after that, I worked for about 20 years for the state government of New Jersey. And I worked my way up. I took an entry-level professional job, and then I got several promotions, worked my way up to supervising 2 statewide programs called business services. And that job included providing services to New Jersey area businesses. If they were relocating to New Jersey, somebody starting a new business, we would help them recruit new people to work for them, find them a place to locate themselves. We would also help them with training. If somebody wanted new employees and they needed to be trained in a particular area, we would give them grant money. So I would negotiate grants with the various employers. And on the negative side, if they were going to have layoffs, we helped them with that as well. I used to supervise a staff of many people who would go out and help the employees get unemployment insurance, help them to write resumes, find another job, etc. So the full spectrum of services for a company from soup to nuts.
Wow. And you mentioned your daughter, Maya. So she was born and raised in the US. So what was her upbringing like, and how did that differ from, your upbringing in India?
Being an only child, she was a little spoiled, I have to admit. Our whole life kind of revolved around her. From the time she was born, she was the center of our universe. So everything revolved around her. But her life was definitely a very, very different from mine. I mean, school here was completely different. She went to public schools, and she had so much more freedom. And back when we were growing up, you could never challenge the teacher. You could never question the teacher. But here it's different. Children have so much more freedom. She had more friends, outside of the immediate vicinity. She could take a bike and go there, or we would drop her off. We didn't have that luxury when we were growing up. The only kids we played with were the immediate neighbors. We didn't go too far. I would get on my bike and go to a friend's house, not too far. But for Maya, it was different. We would drop her off, pick her up. And, she could go to movies when she was little. I didn't start watching movies till I was a teenager. Her life was, and when she went to college, of course, the career options were unlimited, unlike us. We had arts and science, and those were the two avenues, and that was it. But for her, she became she got a master's degree in physical therapy. And then she got another master's degree in healthcare management. So, after that, she got a job with in healthcare management, and she worked as a physical therapist for a couple of years, but part-time while she was actually full-time and part-time school at NYU to get her second master's. So, Maya's life was considerably different from ours. Not too many curfews or anything. She had her own car when she was 17 years old. It was a luxury for people like us growing up in India.
Great. Well, now we're on to the section that I think everybody's very keen to hear about, which is your writing career. So becoming an author, what inspired you to start writing The Dowry Bride? And if you don't mind me mentioning, you began your writing career in your 50s. So I'd love to hear about that.
Yeah, well, I would say I'm an accidental writer, because writing was never on my radar at any time. I mean, as a little girl, I could write my essays and things like that, but I never thought I would become a writer someday. You come across so many writers who say, oh, ever since I was a little girl or a little boy, I wanted to be a writer. That was never me. And I call myself accidental because what happened was Prakash, my husband, was sent, to Baltimore to work on a project which would take him away from home Monday through Friday. At that point, we were already empty nesters. Maya was, working on her own. She wasn't home for many years by that time. And my evenings used to get rather lonely. I had a full-time job, so I had a demanding job. But after 6 o'clock, eat dinner, and then, I would kind of feel a little lonely. So I said, maybe I need a hobby, And it was also like a midlife crisis. The husband's gone 5 days a week. The daughter's away from home. She has her own life. And what am I going to do? Feeling a little sorry for myself. So you could call it a midlife epiphany or a midlife crisis, whatever it is. I started to write. I wrote an article. I started by writing an article for India Abroad. It used to be a publication that had a pretty wide circulation in the US. And they had just acquired another company, or they had been bought over by another company that had started something like a society called a society section, where they had human interest, social interest articles coming up. So I looked at those and I said, I could write like that. I could try my hand. So I wrote an article about sending my only child off to college. And I sent it in to the editor and never heard from them for a week or so. And I said, I don't have writing skills. They're not interested. All of a sudden, the following week, I opened India Abroad, and there's my article with a beautiful illustration. And I said, oh, wow. They never told me they accepted my article. And then a week later, I get a check for $50 in payment for that article. And I said, and that is the most exciting $50 I've ever earned in my whole life. And I said, wow, I can write and I can get paid for it. So after that, I started to write more articles and more articles. And I was interested in writing fiction. At that point, I said, I should try my hand at maybe writing short stories. So I started to write a short story, but I wasn't very comfortable with the plotting and the characters and all that because I'd never done it before. So I took a short course at the local community college, an 8-week course where they taught you some basics. And the instructor himself was a new author, newly published author. So he wasn't all that well versed in publishing your books, but he did guide me quite a bit. And The Dowry Bride was a short story assignment for that class. And after I turned it in as my final project, he said to me, I love the story, I love the characters, I love the cultural elements, but Shobhan, you've got too many characters and too much story going on for a short story. Short story should have like just 2 characters at the most 3, and then and the plot should be very simple. If you put your hand at it, maybe you can make this into a full-fledged novel, into a full-length novel. And I said, I don't know if I can do that. It's like 300 pages of what am I going to write? And but I started very slowly but surely. I started to write a little bit at a time, keep editing it, keep discarding some of it, adding more to it, discarding. Eventually I had a novel. So that's when I had to start looking for a publisher, etc. I wasn't sure though.
And what were some of the challenges for beginning to write at this point in your life? Was there anything particular that you found difficult or easy?
Well, there were a few challenges because making time to write was something, because I did have a full-time job. And so I started to get up at 4 o'clock in the morning, which was a little bit of a, challenge right there, setting the alarm and getting up at 4 o'clock in the morning. So 4 o'clock to 6 o'clock I would write. And after that I would, get on the treadmill. At that time I had started to use the treadmill for exercise because my job, involved just sitting at a computer all day or attending meetings. There was no exercise. So I exercised in the morning. So by about 7:15 or so, I would leave for work and get to work by about 7:45. And so I had to write then I had to start writing in the evenings, and I had to start writing over weekends, and one thing led to another. And the challenge was basically making the time. And the second challenge was self-doubt. I mean, is this really going to sell? For many years, I had been reading mainstream books. I love mainstream authors like Danielle Steele and, those kinds of books. And in India, as a teenager and as a young adult, I had been on a steady diet of Mills and Boon romances. And I used to love reading them. And I used to think, why doesn't somebody write something like this with Indian characters? I mean, let's face it, we've had this boy meets girl type of romance, that goes on in the Hindi movies. Every movie practically in those days was that. And I said, why can't it be a movie? Why can't, Bollywood be turned into a book? And nobody was writing those books. All Indian authors were writing like very serious slice of life literary novels, which were beautiful to read, but sometimes they can be a little depressing because, you start with the character doing something and 300 pages later, they're still doing the same thing. They haven't grown. The story hasn't moved any further. They're in the same life, very often. So I thought there was a lack of Indian romance or Indian Bollywood type mainstream books. And so I joined an organization called the Romance Writers of America, just to get a feel for what other people write. And they were all non-Indian authors, of course, and they were writing romances and mainstream books for the American public. And while I was there, I learned a lot, though. It was a wonderful place they had workshops for plotting and for characterizing and for pacing your book and, how to do point of view and, all kinds of things. They also guided you in how to find a literary agent and all that. So it was well worth my while going there, once a month for a meeting and attending all these workshops. And over there, I mentioned this, I said, there are no Indian characters. I don't know if anybody's interested in reading like something like that. And they were very supportive. They said, why don't you just write something and start looking for a literary agent? You never know. I mean, people are watching Bollywood movies and eating them up. So, why not books? So, those doubts slowly started to melt away when I went there. I felt very energized and I thought, okay, maybe there is a market for something like this.
And that kind of leads on to the next question, which was, who encouraged you the most to publish your work? Who was kind of rooting you on?
More than who, I would say what, because the success that I had with publishing all these articles in the various magazines, those were a good start. And the short stories that I started to submit to various places started to win some awards. That was a big boost to my morale. because and I won top prize for my short fiction with New Woman magazine in India. It was fairly new at the time. The publication was started by that actress Hema Malini. And, I sent my story in just to be published, and it got published. But then all of a sudden I realized that they had also entered my story in their competition. And one fine day they said, "Oh, you won an 11,000 rupee prize." I said, "Oh, okay." That was the next best thing after my $50 check. So I said, I'm going to, I'm definitely going to write this book. So it more than, and of course, my family, they were very supportive. At first, my husband had doubts. He said, "Are you sure you can take the disappointment of being rejected?" And I said, "Yeah, I think I can handle it, So, but my daughter and my husband were extremely supportive right from the beginning. So that's when, that's who inspired me, and what inspired me.
That's great. And then one of the things that I'm really keen to hear about is your writing process. So, that initial story you mentioned came about in a class, in a workshop. But for your other stories, how do you come up with the ideas for your work? What's that process look like?
I think newspaper articles, here and there you would read a newspaper article about the dowry system and, how many brides are killed as a result of not having paid dowry or something like that. Or then at that point I had started to read about sonograms being done in India to to find out the gender of the baby that's going to come, and it's abortions based on gender, widow remarriage and things like that, and premarital sex, things like that have always been there in our society. Those issues have always been there, and and Indian culture by itself is pretty contradictory, because women are given so much education these days, and they're encouraged to take up careers and all that, but at home it's a different life. At home, especially for married women, they may have equal status in many ways, but not quite equal status. And that was something that I was interested in. So there were various issues that I was interested in, except taking that issue and putting it in a story, in a Bollywood in a book type story, was the challenge. But then I managed to, kind of snatch an issue here and there and then make it my own.
So what is your writing process like? Do you plot out the entire story at the beginning? Do you just kind of start writing? What does that look like for you?
I have a basic idea. I have a basic storyline in mind. I never had a proper outline. I'm not very disciplined. I'm not a disciplined writer. I write by the seat of my pants. So I would start the writing process. I knew how it would start and how it would end. But a writer's challenge, one of the biggest challenges for a writer, is that sagging middle, as they call it. I mean, how do you keep the reader's interest from chapter 1 to chapter 2 to all the way to chapter 35 or whatever it is, So that is the challenge of writing. So, but I would have a basic idea in mind and I would start to write. But the drawback, of not being disciplined is that sometime on page 232, you would get there and then you would realize that you wanted to put in a scene that would contradict what happened in the first scene. So you have to go back and change that. And then that changes the whole thread that goes through the story. So you have to recheck every one of your chapters to make sure that there is a continuum. So it's not the most effective way of writing a book, but it worked for me. So, everybody writes differently. I know authors who are very, very disciplined. They have the outline for every chapter and, the spelling check and everything is done perfectly. And, they have it all down pat by the time the whole book is written out and fleshed out and, and expanded upon. But I just did what worked for me.
And you mentioned that you would get up, at 4:00 in the morning to begin to write. So during the process of writing all of your novels, how often did you write? And, what was that schedule like for you?
I wrote every day, a little bit every day. And if I had writer's block, then those were the days I used to use for self-editing. And editing is very, very important. I mean, you have to keep checking and rechecking because there are clunky sentences. Sometimes paragraphs have to be moved back and forth, because there has to be a chronology to that. So yeah, it took me some time to do self-editing, but the non-creative days were perfect for editing. So I wrote every day. That was the only way to keep myself going at a steady pace. It's a discipline, really.
And what about your final drafts? When did you feel like your drafts were complete? Was there something that you had in mind that you were trying to achieve? Was there something that kind of told you, okay, this is, because they always say a writer's work is never done, right? So how was that for you? When did you feel like, okay, I think I'm there with this novel?
I think I totally agree with that writer's work is never done part. There's no point when you think it's perfect. Absolutely, you don't think it's perfect. One of the good things I had, one of my most valuable resources as a writer was a critique group. I had two other writers in my critique group. They used to be my classmates at that course that I took. And we got together. One was she liked to write mystery thrillers. And the second one wrote mainstream books based in Ireland. She was very fond of Ireland as, her ancestral country. So she used to write that. So it was a good mix. It's always, when you find a critique partner, it's always good to find somebody who writes another genre. So it's a fresh pair of eyes looking at your work. And we used to meet once a month. We used to exchange chapters. 3 chapters was our standard. And we would get together at my house. Since Prakash was never at home, it was easy for us to meet in our house, because one of them had a very noisy dog and the other one had a husband and a child in the house. So my house was the preferred home to meet, and we would meet once a month and critique each other's work. And that was my most valuable resource as a writer. So at the end of the whole thing, after the critiquing had been done and the whole book was finished, that's when I would feel comfortable that, okay, this is good enough now. I can't do any more. The final draft.
I'd love to talk to you a little bit more about the themes and the topics that you delve into in your book. So, you write mainly about strong female characters, and I'd love to know why you gravitate to these issues specifically.
Probably because, of my educational background in sociology. Social themes were always something that I was into. And I'm a very opinionated woman. So these kinds of issues I gravitate towards them very naturally. I was always accused of talking too much, saying too much, being a little tactless, So somehow, ever since I was a young girl, it bothered me to look at our dowry system. I thought it was a horrible way to get your daughter married. You're literally paying somebody to take her off your hands. And that's something that bothered me. And then again, this gender-based abortion, the more research I did on the subject, I realized that they say that something like millions, 20 to 30 million girls were stopped from being born in a short, span of time in India because of this. And it's very bothersome. I mean, you're not only because of morality, but also, and it's illegal, by the way, now it's illegal, but it still happens. But also because you're messing with nature. The ratio of girls to boys, God has created a fine balance with that ratio. And if you selectively get rid of one sex, it's not good, because China has already learned that lesson. They used to have a worse problem than India. And they were in China, they had lots of times cousins had to marry cousins because there were no brides available. And that has started to happen in India and in some rural parts of India and northern India, etc. And that's not a good thing to happen. I mean, there has to be a proper balance between males and females in a society. So that's the more practical aspect of it. And, morally, of course, legally, all of those issues. Then widow remarriage, back in the old days when I was growing up, widows were not treated all that well. They were not encouraged to find another relationship if they were young widows, and that was, to me, it was very sad. I used to, wonder why is this woman who became a widow at 20 or something like that, why wasn't she allowed to get married once again, And then, girls and boys mixing with each other, going out on dates and things were never allowed. And, I always resented the fact that, hey, Western teenagers can go out with boys. I mean, it doesn't have to be a romantic relationship, just going out, and I'm not allowed to do that, especially not in a place like Belgaum. I kind of resented that. So all these opinions that I had kind of naturally gave me some ideas for my books.
And how do you meld Indian and American cultures and perspectives in the books that you write?
I think there's a lot of commonalities between American culture and Indian culture. I mean, let's face it, to this day in America, Americans are not willing to accept a woman as a president. On the other hand, we had a female prime minister in the 60s in India. So, but there are other common things, the way women are treated in the workplace. To this day, women are not paid the same as men. They're not treated the same as men. How many CEOs of major corporations are women today? I mean, compared to the number of females that are educated and working today, right? I'm not saying just as a statistic, but as a ratio of women to men working in private industry, in the public sector, they don't go all the way up. Public sector, I have to say, is a lot better. They, at least where I was, we had, assistant commissioners, female commissioners, so they did go up. And we had a deputy governor in New Jersey who was a woman. And we had a governor who was a woman. Her name was Christine Whitman. So I did see that, because it's more of a, liberal state than other states. But there are common things to our culture in our culture and their culture, and so I mixed the two. It was a good mix for me, and I think modesty and compliance and softness is expected from women in the US as well as in India. For some reason, I don't know, women are expected to be much more emotional and softer in their touch and everything. So there are higher standards for women, and so, it was easy for me to sort of make that segue from that culture to this culture, at least in terms of my writing. And my books are filled with like Americanisms. If you read my books, you'll see sentences here and there that sound very American.
And then you mentioned a little bit about this concept of Bollywood in a book. I'd love to hear a bit more about, how that inspired you and what brought that up for you.
Mainly because as a teenager and a young adult, I watched a lot of Hindi movies. Was very fond of going to the movies with my friends. And that helped me to, get some idea that, this would make a good book. That's why I started to call it Bollywood in a book. And I thought, if you take out the singing and the dancing and all that craziness in the Hindi movies, if you just stick with this basic story and the plot, it could be a good book. And that's what I did. I sort of put all those ideas together and started writing my books, make it a good family drama with some romantic elements. And by the way, my books, when they were first being sold, they were sold as multicultural fiction with romantic elements. So that's what my books are about. Bollywood somehow had become very popular by that time in the United States. So it helped me in using that concept. And any one of my books would make a great Hindi movie. And, that's what I thought. I thought, somebody who reads this book to them, it should feel like, oh, I'm watching a Hindi movie.
Great. And then one of the things that I think a lot of people are curious about is the whole process of publishing a book. So what was that like for you? How did you find an agent? How did you find a publishing house? What was that like?
That was a huge challenge, by the way. And I was so naive. I didn't know how difficult it was to break into the world of fiction. I just thought, oh, well, you write a book and then you start sending these letters to, some literary agents. Somebody might pick it up and then they'll sell it to a publisher. And in those days, some people had, been publishing, doing self-publishing. But back then it was not considered the most efficient way to do it, because what you would do is pay a publisher to publish your books, and then you'd get maybe 1,000 copies or something like that and fill up your garage with books. And then you would have to go selling them on your own. And you would get couple of thousand readers, 5,000 readers, maybe if you're really lucky and good at marketing, 10,000 readers. And yet, you are paying the publisher, to publish your books. The ideal way in those days was traditional publishing, meaning you find a literary agent and then they will sell your book in a contract to a good publisher, and the publisher pays you. You don't pay the publisher. That was always drilled into me by that Romance Writers Association. Never pay a penny from your pocket. They should come to you and offer you money. And that's what I wanted to do. It was tough finding a literary agent, and it's very normal to get rejections. So I got my share of rejections. And then I read this wonderful book called The Kite Runner. And I'm sure everybody in the audience here has probably read it, or at least a major, portion of the audience. I fell in love with that book, and I looked up who the literary agent was for Khaled Hosseini. And I approached her and she signed me on. She said, I love this concept of Bollywood in a book. I'll take you on. And she was an icon in the publishing industry. She had been a publisher and an editor for many years before she went into agenting. So when she signed me on, I was thrilled. I got one of the best agents in the world, working for me. She sold 6 of my books to Kensington Publishing. But it was a challenge finding that, because literary agents have a very demanding set of rules. For a literary agent and the publisher, it's money. For you, it's a creative process, a fun process, and a labor of love. But for them, it is everything about the bottom line. The agent has to make money. The publisher has to make money. They look at your book as a commodity. And the agent looks at you as a package that comes with it. She loved the concept that I had an arranged marriage, and that, I still wore saris sometimes. And I cooked Indian food at home. So for the American public, it worked very, very well. Look, here's a lady who started writing in her 50s, and now, she's still in the Indian culture, and she's writing these books, but she can also speak English, and she can write in English, and she can stand before a group of people and speak eloquently. So all that worked quite well for me. I did. Kiran has some, pictures up there of me signing books at various venues. I had multiple author events. I had literally dozens and dozens of author events at libraries, at women's organizations, at bookstores. One of them is a bookstore, and here's some more bookstores, libraries, reading groups. And, because of the social interest issues and hot button issues that I had picked for my books, a lot of women's organizations in the US picked them up. They were very interested. Many of them didn't know what dowry was, what gender-based abortion was, etc. And they got very interested. And so I used to get invited very often to address these groups, and also for fundraisers. There are lots of NGOs in the United States that deal with South Asian women and men who are experiencing domestic violence, etc. And they do fundraisers. And I was invited to various fundraisers. So, I spoke there because this was exactly the topic that they deal with every day, domestic violence, etc.
And how did you market your books? Was that something that you had a hand in, or was that all taken care of by the publishers?
The publisher takes care of, I am called something like the term is a mid-lister, because I would, my books sold a few 100,000 copies. If you sell in the millions, of course, they'll do all the marketing for you because you're making them so much money, right? So part of their budget is, factors in the marketing. But for people like me, they would do maybe about 20 to 30% of the marketing. They send out books to their usual list of reviewers, and they will do a few ads in some of the magazines where they are comfortable doing it, for a good price. But the rest is all on the author. I had to do a lot of marketing on my own. I had to do online virtual tours. They were called virtual tours. And there are lots of men and women who do this for a living. They do something called a virtual tour. They charge you a certain amount of money, and they will put you as a guest on blogs, and now there are podcasts and things like that. Back then it was mostly blogs and blog talk radio. They used to call it blog talk radio. So I used to be taken to those venues and sell my book that way. So most of it was online, but a lot of it was me getting in touch with librarians. I used to do a PR blitz with all the librarians in my state and other states. And they would, if they took an interest in my book, then they would recommend that as, for their reading groups. And then they would invite me to speak. And then there's lots of word of mouth. Somebody would read my book and say, you know what? I have a reading group. I have a reading club. A book club? Would you mind coming and talking to us? And I would love to do that. And I started doing those by Skype as well for out-of-staters, out of the country. I did quite a few with Canadian groups via Skype, and one in South Africa, different states in the United States. I don't remember doing any in India, but I that's how I marketed my books. And each time the audience got bigger and bigger. And one of the things about me turning to fiction, I mean, as a sociology student, I could have easily written a nonfiction book about dowry system or something like that. I would get all of maybe 500 people reading that, scholarly journal that I wrote. But if I felt that, all these ideas, bringing awareness to these issues in India was important to me, and I would get a wide audience if I put that into an interesting story with a little romance thrown in, and, then it would definitely be read by a lot more people. And I was right. It got me thousands and thousands of readers all over. I used to get readers writing to me from all over the world, the West Indies and Africa and Germany and all kinds of places. So, it did get to a lot of people.
That's great. And then you mentioned about podcasts and some of the things that are out now. So how have things changed since you published your last book?
My last book came out in 2012. And since then, things have changed so much. Even by 2012, I had noticed that Twitter and Instagram and Snapchat, I used to be on Facebook, and that was my only social network that I had. I didn't have any other social media working for me, really. And that was a mistake. I mean, maybe because of my age, I don't know. I was just not interested in doing a lot of social media. And whereas the younger writers now are doing a lot of that. So TikTok and, all kinds of places where you can go and promote your book. And I didn't do that. So things have changed a lot. And guess what? After my books came out and they became successful, a lot of Indian authors like me emerged. They all decided, oh, wow, if she can do that, I can do that. So there's lots of them now. A lot of them are younger, very talented, very media savvy. So, they sell more books. They get a lot more reviews on Amazon. They do a fine job of marketing their books. So I'm really happy to see that my Bollywood in a book concept has proliferated to this degree.
And you mentioned that it's been about 9 years since your last book. So what is your life like now? I know you live in Arizona and close to your grandkids. So what's daily life like for you now?
Well, I was supposed to retire from my job technically in 2016 or 2017. But in 2011, our second grandchild, our grandson, was born here in Arizona. Maya, my daughter, and her husband, Samit, have always been living in Arizona since they got married. And after the second baby came, I just, it was tugging at my heartstrings. I wanted to be with them. I wanted to, spend more time with them when they were babies and, see them growing up. And Kiran has put up a picture of, and we travel. We've been traveling a lot. I mean, we wanted to travel to all kinds of places in the world, but we couldn't do it while we were both working. Couldn't take more than a week off at a time at the most. Now we had plenty of time to travel. So we've been traveling a lot and spending time with the family, with the grandkids. And you see pictures of the grandkid. Now we have a grand dog. So, so
the grand dog.
Yeah. And I decided not to write anymore. One of the reasons I mentioned was, because I'm not very good at marketing my books anymore, not the way they used to get marketed. And the second thing is I wanted to spend more time with my husband traveling, because when we were both working, he used to travel a lot. So we didn't spend as much time, traveling. So now is our time to travel and enjoy the family and enjoy socializing. And I'm experimenting more with food. My cuisine used to be very, very basic. My cooking used to be very basic. Now I'm becoming more ambitious and looking at videos and making different dishes and things like that. So life has changed, but it's been a great journey. My writing journey has been wonderful. It's been a roller coaster, but it has been, very uplifting. And I couldn't even dream of the success I got. It just sort of fell into my lap, and I've enjoyed every moment of it. And half my success I attribute to my husband, because he used to maintain my website. He used to drive me to different places if they were too far for me to drive, or if it was going to be late at night and he was worried that I would be driving back home alone. He takes care of all of the business end of it, the checks coming in, whatever. He keeps track of the mileage that I used to put on when I used to go to all these author events for tax purposes. He took care of all of that. So in author speak, it is called The Hands That Hold You Up. Somebody had written a book called The Hands That Hold You Up. I don't know if you've heard that term. It means the support that you get from your family and your friends. And Prakash and Maya, have provided me the hands that held me up all these years. So I'm very grateful, very grateful.
Well, Shobhan Bachchi, thank you very much for answering all those questions. I just have one final question for you, which is, what advice do you have for any aspiring authors that we have listening today?
I would say, if you really want to write, then start writing. Instead of thinking about it, just get on your computer and actually start putting your thoughts on paper. And there is some wisdom to write what you know. It's easier because if you start, initially, it's a good idea to start writing what you know, because then there's less research involved and, your thoughts come together much more easily. And later on, you can experiment with, writing what you don't know but would like to learn about, and you can do more research. And also keep in mind that if you really want to be a published author, you have to grow a thick skin, because you get reviews that are the full spectrum, from really, really bad, nasty reviews to like really glowing reviews and everything in between. So you have to be able to handle that. You have to be able to handle criticism. Some reviewers, professional reviewers can be pretty brutal in their critiques. So that's something you have to learn to accept. Same thing with literary agents. They give you really serious feedback, and they are, not very good at being tactful sometimes. So you do have to handle all of that very well. And that's something that I tell every published author, about to be published author. Brace yourself for some bad reviews. Especially fiction. There's somebody who loves your book and somebody who hates your book, and then there's that whole group in between. So go with the flow.
Well, thank you, Shobhan Bachchi. We have a couple of questions here from the audience that I'd like to ask you. So the first question is, do you have one specific agent or multiple agents?
No, I had only one agent that I worked with. She handed me over to her junior partner. So the agency was the same. So I always worked with them. And then my agent passed away sometime in the middle of my career, but her subordinate was taking care of all of the issues for me until my very last book. So that was the only agent I had.
Okay, great. Well, we have a compliment here, which is awesome, frank explanation of the discipline from a writer, as this is never told by authors. So thank you for sharing the insider's look at the writing process. And then question 2 is, what copyright laws should we consider while publishing a book?
Copyright laws, you can apply for a copyright yourself, pay for it and get a copyright yourself. But I didn't have to worry about any of that because my publisher took care of all of that. Once you get a publisher. And another thing I forgot to mention was once you sign a contract with a publisher, you have to be, very disciplined in your writing, because they, like I said, for them, it's a business. There are deadlines to meet. There are serious deadlines. When they say, I want your full outline in 3 weeks, they really mean it. I mean, they might give you a little bit of leeway for a week or so, but, they expect you to be very professional about it. Unless there's some serious issues going on with your life, which they will, accept. Excuses like, oh, I forgot or something like that look very unprofessional. So once you sign a contract, you're in it. And then my contract said 1 book per year. So in 6 years, 6 books. So
wow. And then the next question is, what are the typical challenges that one faces when publishing a book? I think you touched on some of them, but were there any others that you didn't mention?
I think I pretty much covered the whole thing. Making time for your writing, coming up with ideas. And like I said, that sagging middle, that is one of the biggest challenges most fiction writers, face. Because what happens is, you have a wonderful opening and you have a wonderful end, but somewhere in the middle, the story has to keep going. And my advice to any aspiring writer is end each chapter with a small hook. So if you end each chapter with a small hook, it encourages the reader to turn the page and go to the next chapter and the next page and the next chapter. So you have to keep that in mind. The story has to remain interesting.
Definitely. And then I think this is the last question that we have here, which is a very serious one. How do you see married life for Saraswats evolve in the immediate future in India and the US and UK?
I have always been a fan of interracial and intercaste marriages. In fact, when I was growing up, I always used to think, someday there's going to be so many intercaste marriages that this caste system will the lines will blur and it might even disappear. Unfortunately, that has not happened. I thought the dowry system would go away. It has not gone away, and in some instances, it has become worse because people have become quite well-to-do, and the dowries have gone up in price too. And but I hope to see, and in the United States, I see a lot of the younger generation marrying outside the Saraswat community. And as a result, their outlook on life has changed, etc. So my daughter ended up marrying a Saraswat, and, we're very happy about that. And, but many of her friends who are married outside the Saraswat community are equally happy. So it's nice to see that. I think the children that come from those marriages have the advantage of seeing different cultures, the different grandparents, etc. And that's a plus.
And we have a great question here, one that I meant to ask you earlier, which is, what would you recommend as a solution for writer's block?
My solution for writer's block was always go to editing. Whatever you already have written, you go through it line by line and make sure that your grammar is correct, your syntax is correct, and your spelling and everything is correct. And you'll find that no matter how many times you go back and do editing, there's still more to do because there are clunky sentences sometimes. And even if your English language skills are superb, you will find clunky sentences. And it's kind of embarrassing when the line editor at the publishing house says, this doesn't sound right. and you think, oh, geez, I'm the author and I should have got that, but it's difficult to catch your own mistakes. So I would say, writer's block is very common. I mean, I would go through writer's block for weeks at a time. And, those were the days when I used to. And another thing you can do when you have writer's block is start on another story. You can have 3 or 4 novels or 3 or 4 short stories going on at the same time. It kind of changes your perspective because now you're dealing with different characters and a different plot. So, that block sort of starts to dissolve a little bit, when you go to a different story and a different perspective, a different point of view.
Great. Well, I think that's all the questions that we had. Thank you again, Shobhan Bachchi. And for the audience, Shobhan Bachchi has kindly agreed to take some questions via email if you have any. Just as a caveat, Shobhan Bachchi is not an editor, so please do not send any manuscripts or any other stories that you want edited. This is only for advice or any other questions that you might have. I believe Kiran Ma'am is going to include the email address here for us. And with that, thank you again, Shobhan Bachchi, for your frank conversation today. I really appreciate your time, and I'll turn it over to Kiran Ma'am.
Thank you. And thanks to everybody for joining us today and for listening to me talk and talk and talk. Is Kiran going to be on?
Not only, sorry, here's, thank you. Firstly, this was a wonderful session we had, and uniquely so. Our pioneering author, we were honored to have Shobhan Bachchi, and I flashed the email address, but I will also put it in the chat. So actually, we'll have our backend people send that out if possible. And so there's not only did we get good questions, we also got several compliments. Here's one last one that we received that I'd like to share. Shobhan, you have been simply outstanding, frank, candid, passionate, and graceful. Thank you. So
thank you for that comment.
See, the
Whoever
fans
sent it
have been waiting till the end, and they've been charmed by your style and your candidness and the passion.
Thank you to everybody. Thank you to everybody for tuning in today. And thank you all for organizing this and for your kind support.
Very good. So at this point, I would, we have completed another successful round of Mulaqats across the oceans, the second one. Thanks to everybody involved. I would like to start with, we under the blessings of Param Pujya Swamiji, Satyajat Shankarasham Swamiji, we have done so well with this program, and his blessings continue to shower upon us for our success. Thanks also to our audience. You patiently waited. I know it's been a rather early Saturday morning for folks on one side, and on the other side, having to stay up till late at night. Thanks for your patience with us as we have worked across time zones. And our special thanks came to our honored guest and accomplished Indian fiction writer, Shobhan Bachchi, very well known here among the US community, beyond our Konkani, our micro Konkani community. And for a wonderful, motivating discussion together with our passionate writer and interviewer, our young adult, Preeti Ubaikar, who did a fabulous job with her charming British accent. And please give them a big hand, everyone. Thank you. I would like to thank you. I would like to thank also our organizers, KSA President Praveen Kadlemam, who has always supported us so kind, with a lot of humility, working day and night on multiple items and doing so well everywhere. Thank you, Praveen Ma'am. And our Vice President, Kishore Masukar Ma'am, who is in quarantine in UK on a different time zone. And he joined us and shared with us his thoughts before and has supported us. Our chairman of Canada Saraswat Association, Jairam Kambatkon Ma'am, so graceful and so supportive. And certainly the entire KSA staff that has supported this activity, all the members involved with mastering this ceremony, the MC members, and the CSN, the Chitrapur Saraswat Network Task Force, because they are led by the very effective, kind and supportive Rajiv Kalyanpur. Thank you. It's been really a pleasure and an honor working with you and your team. And the Intro team that has supported us providing live streaming so effectively in the background. It has worked so well. Thank you. And on the CHF side, I would very much like to thank our president and also our secretary. Both Arun Heble Ma'am, who's our president, and Pramod Mavan Kurve. They've been silently supporting me and helping me make this program successful. I think Shobhan mentioned earlier, Shobhan Pachi, that the connection between Pramod Mavan Kurve Ma'am and her got us this event. She's a very busy lady, even in her current life. And so we were fortunate, thanks to both our treasurer and secretary and our chairman from Chitrapur Heritage Foundation. With that, I'd like to conclude and then hand this back to Rajiv. Thank you,
Rajiv. So, Zai, we're coming to the end of a wonderful evening. Shobhan Pachi, you have been so eloquent and articulate. We just didn't realize that almost an hour or more than an hour this has gone on. We would have loved to have listened to you even more, but have to end. Mayur ma'am to hangetva sabha samaptigetva.
You want me to talk?
Om Nandantu Sadhaka Sarve Vinashantu Vidushakaha Avastha Shambhave Mestu Prasannostu Guru Sada Sarve Bhavantu Sukhinaha Sarve Santu Niramayaha Sarve Bhadrani Pashyantu Ma Kasyat Dukha Vapnuyat. Om Shanti 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 Om.